Woo! Been a minute, hasn't it? Welcome to the first episode of season 3, the final season. Yeah. Um, so, oh yeah, this. We'll get into this in a second. Welcome to season 3, the first episode. Glad to have you back. It's been a minute, way too long. But anyway, let's just get into the meat of it. So, I have. You're probably wondering about this flag that I have in my hands. You're probably not, but I'm going to tell you anyway. This is a flag for a fictional nation that I made up, and I decided to take it upon myself to give it some backstory, because every country has a history, geopolitics and stuff. I'm kind of into geopolitics. Geopolitics countries, listen, I was a Stack the Countries kid. Like, if you know what Stack the Countries is, you know what Stack the Countries is. And you know that you have to complete the game at least twice. But, Stack the Countries, I made a country because I'm into that sort of thing. History and that stuff's kind of my thing. So let's talk about it. I normally have a slideshow for it. I made a slideshow for it, but I don't really have it up right now. So I'm just going to try to explain this to you as best as I can without the slideshow. And we're probably going to have to do it in parts so that way I can keep this short and not just keep it 30 minutes of me stuttering and breathing going, yes, you get the idea. Yeah. I've come to the realization that happens a lot in my videos where I end up at a stalemate with myself and stuttering and breathing, not really doing anything. Because I don't edit, because I can't edit, except for that Christmas special where a good friend of mine did it for me. Bless your heart, Isabella. So we're just gonna do this unedited, short, and maybe in parts. Let's just get into it. So, this fictional nation I made up, is named Bralehika. Kind of hard to pronounce, but it's spelled Bralehika. Bralehika. Most people just call it Bralehika. It's Bralehika, just so we're clear. And this was a nation that has constantly been, think of Poland. Think of Poland, constantly like under reunification, disillusion. It's like a whole fight for survival thing. So we begin our story of this nation in Europe because when anyone makes a fictional nation, it has to be in Europe because Europe's one of the oldest settled continents in the world. Period. Like, there's no fact checking it. Actually, there might be. I could be wrong, but everyone thinks Europe is like. Everyone knows that like Europe's kind of like the hodgepodge for medieval shit. So we're just gonna go with that. As for the geography of Bralehika, it's around the Ukraine area, which, given the situation in the world, is a little ironic. But I made this nation back in December of 2021, before this happened, before the whole invasion thing happened. So I'm sorry if I offended anyone, but yeah. God damn it, I did it again. General Ukraine area, and our story starts with back about the 1900s with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. If you don't know what Austria-Hungary is, it was an empire that existed from, I want to say, late 1800s to early 1900s. It dissolved because they lost World War One, but anyway, we start there. We start around 1905, 4 or 3. Basically, they were an influential power, but they were also kind of losing influence because some of their provinces, like Romania, some of the Baltic states, had been declaring independence with help from Russia, which really pissed off the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this was just another case of nationalists in their provinces trying to rise up, and it would just so happen to be in the top right or easternmost corner of Austria-Hungary. And so Russia wanted to take easy advantage of the opportunity, and so they decided to make a pact with the new nationalists, say like, hey, we'll help you out, as long as you remain loyal to us or whatever. And so the Bralehikans the Bralehikans, as they're called, were like, hell yeah. So, and the Russian troops went to the war. They started what's called the Russo-Russia War for Bralehika. It lasted from 1906 to 1907-ish. Basically, what happened was, like, the Russian and Austrian troops were duking it out in the provinces of Austria-Hungary, somewhere along the lines of the Dnipro River, if you know where that is. It's like, just think of Ukraine, and, like, think of, like, if you split it in half, but kind of, like, added a little, like, dent to it. That's what the Dnipro River looks like. And so that was where most of the battlefront took place. The thick current of the river did, however, keep some provinces from remaining combat, but most of them just went restationed and then fought the war there. And after about a year of the war, 1906, we jumped to like 1905, 1906 went by, and then around 1907-ish, or early 1907, most of them realized, like, we gotta end this war. We didn't both want to spend this much resources on a war, so let's just fucking end it. The problem was, no one knew how to do that except for a Russian general. I forget what the name of the Russian general was that I made up. I think I just went to a random Russian name generator and just typed it in there, but we're just gonna go with a Russian general, sure. So a Russian general gets the idea to take his troops onto boats that will be provided by Russia, to sail into neutral Crimea, an island off the coast of Ukraine, and from there, what they'll do is they'll sail. They'll go on foot, hike around the edges of Austria-Hungary into the heart of enemy territory, or into the heart of the rest of the country and of the rest of the empire, and damage supply lines until they cripple Austria-Hungary. So, the Russian general does that, right? He gets them on a boat, sails to Crimea. Good for them. Only problem was, it was fucking cold. Because it was the winter of 1907, and so many of his troops died of hypothermia or disease, and he had half of what he originally hoped to have by the time half of troop numbers that he originally intended to have when he arrived at Crimea. But he was too deep in. He had to commit, and plus he he just had resolve. He was like he wasn't a bitch. He wasn't a little bitch. You can't be a bitch on the battlefield, otherwise everyone will shame you for being a bitch. So he just kind of had to do it. So he continued his hike across the edges of Austria-Hungary, and was actually about to get pretty close to their supply lines until they were discovered by a regiment that was heading to the forefront, and so they just fought in that area right there. Although the Russian general realized that he didn't really have the numbers to take a head-on fight, especially because he was in the heart of Austrian territory. So what he did, right, was he did like stealth tactics. He did confusion and deployment tactics, where he would like send troops like certain ways to make the regiment think he had a way bigger army than he actually had. He stealthed around like destroyed rubble and buildings, although there weren't really many, but he used what he had. He stealthed around he laid low in high grass. The troops laid low in high grass. They kind of did like a stealth battle, where fill the enemy with confusion, get him the element of surprise, and somehow, even though they were in the heart of Austrian territory, they managed to kill enough Austrian troops to where the rest of the regiment retreated back to their base, giving them a much needed victory. And so now, with the victory secured and their pathway to the supply lines cleared, they went ahead and laid waste to the supply lines in a very specific way. The Russian general, what he did, right, was he took some, where he improvised, he made some cocktails, like, he fucking went ham, he threw cocktails, he set everything on fire. He, like, went along this countryside, he damaged a good few supply lines, before he eventually had to retreat due to the increasing amount of armies following him because of how many supply lines he was destroying. But the damage had already been done. Austria-Hungary was crippled, and so they had to sue for peace. And at the treaty negotiations, Bralehika would become a new foundation. They would get most of east of the Dnipro River, while also getting some like thick current into like on the west side of the Dnipro River. So essentially, Austria-Hungary got even smaller, and Bralehika was a new foundation. So yay, new foundation, woo! And so after the war, Russia decided to get. Well, actually, no, it's Russia. Russia wasn't just going to let them off the hook. Remember their side of the deal? They remained loyal. Well, Russia made damn sure of that. What they did was they continued to spread their influence into Bralehika after the war, and they even supplied them with a bunch of military and economic shit. But this wasn't just to be nice. This was to make sure that the nation was dependent on Russia. Think of Belarus. Think of Belarus, but 10 times more loyal to Russia. That's kind of Bralehika at this point. So they even gave them like a flag that was just the Russian flag with a black pennant and a green star. It was demeaning, but they couldn't really do anything about it because they did just kind of help them win. So they just kind of took it, not very much gratitude, but they took it. And they used it as their national flag because what else are you going to do? And so from this point, and for a good while, for about the next 5 years, it just turns into a dependency. Like, it's a dependent state, and yeah. But then we cut to we cut to the early 1910s. I forget. I don't know why it's blanking on me what year exactly, but Austria-Hungary was trying to repair itself and was requesting supplies from their Triple Alliance buddy Germany. However, Germany didn't really want to use that, or they didn't really want they couldn't send supplies to Austria-Hungary because they were too busy building up themselves. And the reason why they were building up themselves and no one would give money to Austria-Hungary is because tensions in Europe were rising, right? Everyone hated each other. Well, everyone was talking shit about each other. Everyone was developing new weapons. They all wanted to try those new weapons out on each other. They were all forming alliance packs. Empires didn't want to fall. New empires were rising. Yada, yada, yada. You get the drill. So, you obviously, if you don't know what I'm getting to here right now, you probably didn't pay attention in history class, like, at all. So Bralehika began rapidly militarizing, as in they started taking a lot more imports from Russia, as they were aware that whatever could come out of this, like gossiping and shit, could be threatening to their nation as a whole. Like, it would become a fight for survival. They would soon be proved right, but we'll get to that later. So Bralehika becomes concerningly dependent. And then when Archduke Franz Ferdinand decides to take a little trip to Serbia, and by now we all know how that ends, so World War I begins. Right? World War I. We all know about it. It gets shoved down our throats in every single history class we were ever in. Big technologies, defensive warfare, all that kind of shit. Right? And so most of the war goes relatively the same. Bralehika is able to fend off attacks with help from Russia. But here's the thing. Austria-Hungary in our timeline was like an incompetent mess. Like, their military acts was terrible. They could barely even like attack Serbia. Like, who's like 4 times less their size. And they couldn't break into Russian territory with German help. It was a whole they were humiliated. They were humiliating. But in this timeline, after literally just losing a war to Bralehika, they started to realize, like, oh shit, we could turn this into a war to retake our lost province, so let's do it. And so they actually decided to get their military act together in hopes that they could retake the province, right? So, also, Italy, who was a member of the Triple Alliance, was a bit hesitant once the war started, because Italy loves switching sides, but they were hesitant right now. They remained neutral for now, but anyway, yeah, just clearing that up. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Great Britain, France, Russia. It's the Allies versus Central Powers shtick. You get it, right? So the war goes the same. Jump to 1916. Everyone's basically on the brink of collapse, almost. Germany's getting a blockade from Britain. Most of them are, not having a very good time. And Austria decides to contact Germany to try to attempt another invasion of Bralehika. Whoopsies. Alexa, stop. I don't remember why I set a timer. Anyway, Austria wants to retake Bralehika. Germany refuses again because they don't really have any troops as is. But they suggested that they had a better idea. Enter Vladimir Lenin. You all know him. He's Mr. Communism. He's Mr. I created the USSR and then caused a countrywide famine and then died and then Stalin took over. You know him. He's Lenin. Vladimir Lenin. Basically the gist is they send him back to Russia a year earlier than in our timeline. They sent him back in 1917, I think. In our timeline, they sent him a year earlier because they wanted to get rid of Russia again, but with increased influence from Austria-Hungary on the decision to go early. So they take him out of Switzerland, send him on a train to Russia, and in turn it creates an internal crisis, yada yada yada. Russia pulls out of the war. Germany gets a lot more territory, and thus just rushes out of the war. And so, with Russia out of the war, Bralehika, and in the midst of civil war, Bralehika loses its biggest ally. Like, they have no hope. Most of their military gets taken out to go deal. Most of their Russian military gets taken out to go deal with the Russian Civil War, and so they're basically left helpless. And so Austria-Hungary decides to make it way too personal by gathering up a huge sum of troops and storming into Bralehika in what will become known as the Bralehican Genocide of 1916. The earth is scorched, buildings are toppled, civilians are civilians are kind of captured. Some civilians are captured. Whatever remaining military is captured. Bralehika is totally militarily defeated, and therefore it has no choice but to surrender. Yeesh. Now with that out of the way, Austria-Hungary gets to go bully the Balkan states with help from the Ottoman Empire, who now joins the war. And Italy, who was already a part of the Triple Alliance, decides to join the war once they realize that the Central Powers, or their allies, were winning. So now we got two more members of the Central Powers, and basically all for the rest of 1916, they just kind of bully the Balkan states into either collapsing or surrendering. So the entire Eastern Front gets dealt with in a jiffy by all of them. The Ottoman Empire also wants to take Nej back, which is modern-day Saudi Arabia, for those who don't know. But they try, and it doesn't really go very well, mostly because the Nej, I don't know how to pronounce. I'm just gonna say the Nej. The Nej people are a very big thorn in their side. They're not. It's not going very well. But the Ottomans are bullying the Balkan states extremely well, and so the war in Europe on the Eastern Front is over. It's done. The Central Powers won. And now, Germany, no longer fighting a two-front war, decides to put all of its eggs into one basket for an invasion of France. Because, that's not only the hardest thing. That's basically one of the hardest things you could do in a war ever, judging by the already existing accounts of history. Oh man, I'm talking a lot too, way fast. I need a drink. All right, cool. Anyway, the Germans decide to enact a plan to take France now, before their blockade continues to strangle them, and before the British blockade decides to can strangle them any further, and so that way they can win this war at last. Germany calls upon our allies, who all happily agree to send troops in hopes of getting gains out of this war. The plan for Germany, right, is if they knock out France, they can knock out Great Britain, because Great Britain's an island. And so without an ally on the mainland, they can't really send troops anywhere to go fight in the war. So Great Britain would just kind of be there awkwardly. So they probably have to agree to an armistice. And thus, yeah. So what begins is like the mutual phony war, as I call it. Basically both sides knowing a big invasion's coming. Well, at least the allies don't know until a little later. Basically, Germany and all their allies try to station as many troops as they can, aircraft, tanks, you name it, all being smuggled through their territories into France, which is very hard to do, by the way, especially when you try to be stealthy about it, because you can't send that many troops and not have someone see it. But that leads to France finding out about these stationed troops, and several weeks later, and then calling upon her allies to retaliate. So Great Britain sends a lot of troops. Portugal sends some troops, although it's a little hard going through neutral Spain, but they just kind of sail around. It's a whole complicated process, but basically Portugal isn't able to send that many troops. And so in April of 1917, the Germans finally decide to invade France. They plow through the Western Front in an attempt to override all the trenches and take Paris. Now, most of the time, World War I was a defensive war, not an offensive war. So if you were to just send troops running, most of the time they would get gunned down by machine gun fire, right? Well, the Germans ended up creating a brand new kind of warfare. A kind of warfare that was aimed to conserve troops, warfare that was kind of trying to conserve all military equipment, while also delivering a quick and decisive blow to their enemies. The plan was simple. Send artillery, send aircraft to cover the troops, send the troops running towards them, encircle the trenches, and capture or kill any enemies. Does this sound familiar? Yep, I'm talking about a blitzkrieg. In their desperation to make a plan that conserves troops, they ended up recreating our timeline's blitzkrieg. And so they used this plan, codenamed Operation Panther, due to its quick nature, in this battle. The Allies try as they may to gun down troops with machine guns, are overwhelmed by the artillery and plane gun fire, and so they are really unable to get to most of their machine guns, and so they are helpless to defend themselves as the Central Powers encircle their trenches, capture their troops, and by July of 1917, take Paris. Yep. And what the Germans could not do in World War I in our timeline, they do here. They take Paris, and with that, and everyone knows if you capture Paris, France falls, and so they do. And without an ally on the mainland, Great Britain couldn't really do much. And with the threatening numbers. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention. You might be thinking, where's the U.S. in this? The U.S. was what pushed back the Central Powers. Well, guess what? The Germans, also out of their desperation because they knew that the U.S. might get into the conflict, they didn't restart unrestricted submarine warfare, and they didn't send the Zimmerman telegram. So that way they would maintain good and neutral relations with the U.S. because most of the U.S. at the time was ethnic Germans. So if they didn't do anything bad to the American people, and if the American people saw that the Germans were winning, they would keep cheering for them. Go them, they're out of the war. And so without a U.S. to send troops over to Europe, and without an ally on the mainland, Great Britain has no choice but to surrender. And that, my friends, is the end of World War I. A Central Powers, or German and Austria-Hungary, Ottoman, and Italian victory. What's going to happen next? I don't know. We'll have to save that for the next part. So World War I ends with a Central Powers victory, huh? Quite different. How this nation's mere existence causes an entirely different world story. We'll get into that into the next part, into the thick of what happens, the repercussions of World War I in the next part. But until then, welcome to Season 3. Bye.